swing to Alpine. So Pierre Gasly's first qualifying session was pretty underwhelming. Got knocked out in Q1. He definitely did make amends for it in the race. We ended up finishing in, I don't know, was it ninth? Yeah, so he got 2 points for his troubles. Kind of the opposite for Ocon, who kind of had a decent race, and then everything that could have gone wrong for him, speeding in the pit lane, then working on his car too early after a penalty, like everything that could have gone wrong for him did go wrong. I don't know, underwhelming, not underwhelming, but in the sense that I didn't really notice them at all during the race, really, like just in regards to overtakes, in regards to, like, there was literally no, for me anyway, I had no like mental notes as to, I want to talk about that, or I thought that was interesting, or whatever it might have been. So I just wanted to get your opinions on Alpine's race, if if it was similar, different. Like, what do you guys think?
I think one thing that yesterday's race highlighted was the midfield is so tight now, and even the top 8 as well. When you get stuck in traffic, you do lose a lot of time to the cars in front, because the grid has sort of condensed in the way that all the cars seem to be somewhat competitive. So number one, I think that the Alpine racing from last up to 9th shows that it probably is the pick of the bunch in terms of that midfield, if they can get a good starting position. The caveat to that is you need to get a good starting position in qualifying to then put yourself in a position to attack the cars in that top 10, rather than racing back from last on the grid.
Just being a devil's advocate, so were they at all benefited from, like, they finished 9th, but two McLarens had trouble. Leclerc fell out of the race. Magnussen had issues. Hulkenberg, for whatever reason, just didn't have the legs in the car by the end of the race. Like, they went from last to 9th, and credit has to be given for them there. But are you giving them too much credit for, fighting their way through the field, or were they also the beneficiaries of some, misfortune?
I think you're always a beneficiary to misfortune. I just think, for us to know, number one, we have to see them again next week. But the fact that you're able to get to that position should be a positive. It's not the be all and end all. I still think they have I think at the moment every team has a better car than McLaren. Like, I'm not going to put. I think at the moment that is fact. That car is a piece of shit. So
I'm holding off full judgment until we get to Melbourne.
Yeah.
They were bad in Bahrain all last year.
At the moment, it is not looking great for them. But
you can't. I understand that, but like, they also finished 11th in qualifying.
Yeah, but I'm saying, but the difference between the qualifying car and the race car this year seems to be drastic. And if you've got a good qualifying car, that's great, but it has to be able to do the finish the race, and then also do it in a way that it's not killing its tires. Like, you saw other examples of, like, the Ferrari seems to have a pretty close car in qualifying to the Red Bull, but in race trim, it's night and day. And if Red Bull are compromising their car in quali trim because they know that come race day, they've got 58 laps to pull a minute lead, that's what teams are going to do.
Any other points on Alpine? Any other thoughts, lads, before we move on to Alpha?
Their driver pairing's kind of the one that I'm really going to be watching closely this year, because I think there's going to be some fireworks there, especially if they're racing near each other. Like we saw Fernando and Ocon last year. Ocon doesn't yield for anyone. And if that happens, I feel that with their history, and that could derail the team, because I think Alonso kind of knew he was out and didn't care as much, but Gasly's there to stay there now, and so is Ocon. So it's going to be interesting.
Did you think that Ocon handled that race? By the end of that race, when you heard him talking on the team radio, I was actually pleasantly surprised with how mature he seemed to handle the situation of, this is a pretty terrible, first weekend of the season, but he wasn't sort of making any irrational
I think you
statements.
realize that. I think you got to realize that the first week of the season's longer
Mm.
than it's ever been before. Issues were befalling everyone. So just count your loss. At the end of the day, you lose 6 points to your competitors, something like that. So it's definitely not the end of the world for anyone, really. That's the long and short of it. Unless you're bloody Aston Martin and you've got your third and sixth, and you're kind of pretty happy in that midfield battle right now. Alfa Romeo, what do we think? Bottas was in a few dogfights, normally on the losing end of some overtaking maneuvers, but he looked racy.
Mhm.
The car just didn't seem to have the legs of the rest of them.
I think they're a beneficiary of everything else that happened as well. I don't know if that car is a car capable of finishing in the top 10 week in, week out by the looks of it. Joe, what do you think?
I think they've got a better car than. I mean, this is so early to say it. It's definitely better than McLaren, but I think out of the cars,
everyone's better than McLaren right now.
Well, because everyone is. It's easy to be when everyone else finishes the race.
They had the lowest growth from Q1 to
who's that?
qualifying last year to this year. Alfa Romeo.
They were quick at the start of the year, though.
Yeah, they were quick at the start of last year. They were.
Yeah.
I mean, to get one car in the top 10, I think a lot of the mid teams are sort of like that. It's going to be interesting to see how it progresses through the year. That is a sophisticated looking car, though, compared to a lot of the other midfield teams. So I'm interested to see how much scope it has for, growing onto it. With the plain cars, you can sort of see, we can, utilize this space here, utilize this space there. But that car it looks very sophisticated already. I was interested.
When anyone was watching the race, did you kind of notice as you were watching it how much black there was on the car?
How dark it is. I don't like it.
I didn't like it as much as I did in the pictures because it just looks like a blob. Especially
but also like a lot of the cars, not just like it's very visible on the Alpha, particularly in the dark. But
they're all blacked out these days.
Saw a lot of like. Obviously, we knew there was a lot of black, but when you watch it in the race, I mean, the car that I think did it the best was Aston Martin. But there's a lot of black on a lot of cars.
I think the Merc has got a lot of tasteful black. The Ferrari has a little bit of tasteful black, but because I think the Alpha's red and black are so close, and it's probably under the
more
lights
of a maroon,
as well. It was very hard to sort of see any of the. It just looked a bit like a blur.
I think that's the issue. It was a night race.
Yeah. What do you make of
one thing about the Alpha? They still got the fastest lap of the race, which it was Gasly was the fastest to the last lap. But for the Alpha to still finish the race with the fastest lap, I think just shows how close the the grid actually is this year, regardless of the Red Bulls running away. But even for them not to be able to, have the luxury of doing a whole race, pitting, throwing on some new tires, and then going for fastest lap to maximize the points, I think in itself is a pretty good position to be in at the moment, even though they seem to be so dominant.
Guan Yu Zhou. Nice helmet. That's how I notice him. Apart from that,
he's a steady Eddie.
He's a steady Eddie, but kind of so steady that he never catches any eyes.
He's always been a steady Eddie.
Unless he's on his roof going down the straight at Silverstone, you don't really hear much about him during the race.
But is that enough? Is that enough to keep his seat?
Well, he doesn't make mistakes, and he picks up points here and there. I think in a mid-table car, that with a high competitive midfield, I think that's really what we have to do. Like Bottas last year flew out of the gates, and he got like 40 of his 50 odd points in like the first. I don't think it was like the first quarter of the season. Zhou got like I think half of that, but it was just an accumulation of races like all throughout the year. So I think he does. Like he obviously did enough to secure his seat because he got his year contract extension. So I think he holds his own pretty well.
I was thinking about Zhou. Go H.
I think with Seidel there now and the transition plan to go to Audi in 2026, I think they'll be looking to replace Zhou quite soon. Whether it's at the end of this year or end of next year, I don't know. But I think I don't think he's the one to take Audi when they come into the sport.
The thing that, excuse me, the thing that interests me about him is this: super steady, completely under the radar, but like Tom said, brings the car home pretty much all the time. And you had someone like Mick Schumacher last year who had a lot more peaks and troughs, but was probably a lot more expensive to have as a driver than Guan Yu Zhou is. So I guess if there's, if you want to keep a seat, one thing's to bring in points. The other thing is to not accumulate a hefty, repair bill. And I think he does that pretty well as well.
Going into full conspiracy mode, though,
yeah,
this is just totally out of left field. If Audi's coming into the sport and you've got Steady Eddie who can finish 12th and Mick Schumacher who can finish 13th DNF or get some points in the race, who's also German.
I think that's huge.
Well, realistically,
for a German brand.
By the time Audi come in, they'll be looking for 2 drivers because Bottas realistically
would be done.
Should be done.
I think it's way too early to have this discussion. I think Joe has done nothing wrong, to be honest. Like he hasn't set the world on fire, but I think at the same time he's probably jumped through every hoop he's needed to jump through.
But he didn't set the world on fire in F2 either. He was there for 3 years. Like he finished behind Piastri, finished behind Leclerc. Did Norris win?
Norris,
yeah, he finished behind. Yeah, he finished behind all the graduates that got to F1 a couple of years before him. So
well, I think if there's any wisdom to be gleaned from other drivers on the grid, we're going to hit him soon. But in a good car, you can look really good. And at the moment, I don't think that Alpha is at the peak of being the best car in that midfield. When you look at someone like Stroll, who sort of looks pretty ordinary when his car is ordinary, and then can race to 6th, beat George Russell with a broken wrist when the car is decent. I think it sort of shows that, a lot of it is the driver, but still a lot of it is the car that you're graced with at the start of the year. So I think got to give him, especially, and like him and Piastri, I think are in the same boat. You just got to give them some time.
Let's move to the big boys of the weekend.
Merc,
Ferrari. Looked like they had a very competitive package after qualifying. It would be interesting to see how it ended up if Charles didn't have the gremlins that finished his race. But what did you guys make of Ferrari? More of the same?
Can we talk about the gremlins? Because I think that's a big thing to skip out on.
Yeah,
first weekend, and they got bloody 2 power units or 1 power unit and a set of batteries already used up. Like, it's insane.
If you notice on my top 5 picks before the race, actually, I didn't put Charles in there because I expected one of the cars not to. I had a thought. I was like, one of these cars isn't going to finish, just off a hunch. And I thought, you know what? It seems to be Charles's car who has the engine problems. I'm just going to go for hunch. It's going to be his car. I have a sneaky suspicion that they've turned up that engine to be somewhat more competitive to the Red Bulls, which it wasn't even anyway. But yeah, for the first race of the season, that is not the sight you want to be seeing 40 laps into a race. But yeah, more of the same. I mean, it's probably a pretty sore headache for Frederick to have in his first weekend as team principal.
What did you think of their comparative race pace? Because I thought Carlos was struggling to keep on the tail end of Charles for most of the race, and he was only in that position. Like,
it'd be interesting to know if they were running at the engines running at different outputs.
It'd be interesting to see as well, even if they're not, if the fact of how hard Charles is running is what's causing them to break.
I wonder if Thomas has any. He's gone. But I was going to say, I wonder if he had any inside knowledge based on the show logos he's got on his T-shirt. I mean, does there any?
if he's heard anything on the grapevine?
Do you get any deep knowledge from that, Tom?
Well, when I'm at the Bowser talking to Eileen, she did say that there were some irregularities with the oil and the compressor in the engine. Yeah, so that seems to be one of the main issues plaguing that car.
There you go, mate. The resident Shell V-Power expert for the podcast.
I think there's one thing to remember. there's one thing to remember about the Ferrari as well, which isn't even due to race pace. It's due to the tire wear situation of that car. It does seem to burn its tires quicker than a lot of the other front running cars. And at a desert race, it's I think for them the biggest thing is, okay, we're not going to have the actual race pace, especially this week, because we're going to burn our tires quicker. We understand that, but for them to then maximize the points that they do get, and for an engine to go, especially on a race like this, I think is massive, because what we saw last year is the fact that, all right, you're going to have some tracks where your car seems to work. That's great, but
you got to limit the depth of your trough. That's like how we get consistent.
What's your worst weekend look like? This race last year, 2 Red Bulls didn't finish and they still smoked the season. So for them to get a 1-2 and for Ferrari to finish with 1 car in 4th is a great start for Red Bull to have at a track that, they lost 40 points at last year.